A roll call, please.
Oh. I can do it. Commissioner Hartwig,
Here.
Commissioner Sager,
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter, not yet here. Commissioner Stahl,
Here.
Commissioner Perkins. Can you see in the attendees list if Tara's here yet? Not yet here. Okay, and Chair Wheeler
Here.
and Commissioner Carpenter is walking through the door right now. I think we can count him as here.
Okay, we'll go ahead and let Commissioner Carpenter sit down and then we will get underway here officially. Item number 1 on the agenda is the approval of the October 18th, 2023 meeting minutes.
You wanted a motion to approve?
I need a motion to approve.
I didn't understand that either, so
So moved.
I second
We got a motion, we got a second. We got any discussion on these meeting minutes? Is there any way I could turn my mic down? I don't need to be that high. 5. Thank you. All right, no discussion. Go ahead and all those in favor, please raise your right hand. Motion carries.
it. Help me.
All right, we have 2 public hearings on the agenda today. We will go through the TSB adoption first, and then we will get into the airport.
I'm sorry, we wrote the agenda a little confusingly. It's one public hearing. Both of those proposals are combined into one package. Sorry.
As Taylor said, we have 1 public hearing, and both of these are looped in together. So with that being said,
Can I, before we get into the official public hearing, I just want to read this to give people a chance.
absolutely.
Okay, so due to a Zoom interruption at Monday's city council meeting, we are now requiring all Zoom speakers to pre-register. You must email planning@cityofestacada.org with your full name, your physical address, and the agenda item or topic of discussion. And we understand that this is a new requirement, and some of you may have missed the announcement earlier this week. You have 30 minutes to submit your request for this meeting in light of these changes. You may also submit written comments and testimony to the planning email address. This is not the final public hearing for the transportation system plan. You are also welcome to attend and give testimony at the scheduled city council public hearing on December 11th. And if you want to give Zoom testimony today and have not already pre-registered, you have 30 minutes to email planning@cityofestacada.org with your name, address, and the agenda item or topic of discussion. You may also submit written comments and testimony to that planning email address. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that being said, we're going to turn it over to planning staff. Give us the planning staff report, and then we will go from there.
Thank you. So we're gonna pull the PowerPoint presentation up on the screen now. Share that. All right. Thank you very much. My name is Taylor. I'm the Community Development Director. And we're here today to begin the adoption process for the Transportation System Plan update and the airport-related policy and code amendments. Today, the Planning Commission will hear the staff report evaluating how the proposal meets the approval criteria. You'll hear an overview of the proposal itself. You'll also hear any public testimony related to the proposal, and then you'll get to discuss and issue your decision, which will be a recommendation forwarded to the City Council. The City Council is the final decision maker on this proposal, and they will hold their public hearing on Monday, December 11th at, I think, 6 p.m. It's possible 7, but hoping for 6. All righty, next slide, please. So the proposal that I'm referring to includes the Transportation System Plan, also called the TSP. This is the long range 20-year plan for managing our transportation system. It also includes what we're calling the airport plan and development code. These are policies and regulations to help guide development around the airport and protect the airport from conflict with surrounding uses. And just noting the project, a little bit about the project team. The project was managed by a team of city staff and consultants in close consultation with a representative from ODOT, the Oregon Department of Transportation, and also with regular coordination and engagement throughout the process with the city council, planning commission, other city boards, stakeholders, and the general public. Next slide, please. Just a brief reminder about kind of how and why we got here and what that timeline looked like. Way back in 2020, we applied for a grant to help us update our outdated 2007 transportation system plan. We received the grant and kicked off this project in early 2022. Around the same time, airport related kind of legal land use issues were coming into light because of a land use application. And so we started working on that problem at the same time. Kind of, we're rolling those two packages of amendments together because they're both transportation related. And so throughout over this past year and last year, we've been working with the council and the community to develop this updated transportation system plan and airport related amendments. So today's hearing begins the adoption process that ends this really big project that we've been working on. And like I said, the final, probably final public hearing and decision on that will be with the city council on December 11th. Next slide, please. Order of events for today's meeting. I am going to summarize the staff report talking about how this proposal meets the approval criteria that have to be met in order for the council to approve it. And we are recommending approval. Then we're going to hear from the project consultants to give an overview of the process of developing the TSP and the content, the recommendations within the TSP. Also, there are development code amendments associated with the TSP to implement the TSP. We'll hear about those. And then we're going to hear from planning staff for an overview of the airport specific amendments to the comprehensive plan, amendments to the development code. After that, so all of that basically comprises the staff report presentation. And at the end of that, we're asking to hold questions until the end. So you should have a pen and paper in front of you. If you don't, please let us know, commissioners. So if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please jot them down and we'll have a time at the end of the presentations for questions from the commission. Anything that we need to clarify or expand on, that would be a good time to hear from you. Then we're going to take a break because it'll take a bit of time to get through all of that. We're going to have a 5-minute break. And after that break, we're going to go into the public testimony portion, hear from folks in the room, hear from folks that have signed up ahead of time online. And then if anyone is online that didn't know that they had to sign up, we understand this is a new requirement that we have. Hopefully we will hear from you by 2:30 at the planning@cityofestacada.org email address. We have Evelyn monitoring that email address. So any emails that come in from folks wanting to testify virtually, we'll be able to do that if they email us by 2:30. After we close the public testimony, then the Planning Commission will get to discuss and vote. Okay. So a little bit about the proposal. It is called Ordinance 2023-007, AKA the Transportation System Plan and Airport Amendments. And it involves several main components. Basically, we're proposing to update the comprehensive plan by adopting the Transportation System Plan into chapter 10 of the comprehensive plan, and also by adopting airport-related objectives, policies, and background information into the comprehensive plan as well. The other main component is the development code amendments, and we're proposing to update the development code by adopting, as I was mentioning, TSP related code, basically to implement the TSP. And then also by adopting a new airport zone and a new airport safety and compatibility overlay zone to implement the policies that we are adopting related to the airport. There was also a, in your packet, there was also a proposed zone change related to the airport. However, we've talked with several residents around the airport area, and we're actually going to propose something different that would still accomplish the same objective of protecting the airport from encroaching residential development while still protecting property owners' rights to build a single home on their property. So our senior planner, Alan, here is going to describe that change in more detail later in this presentation. We can answer questions about that if you have them. Okay, next slide. So in order to adopt these changes, the city council must find that the proposal meets all of the approval criteria that apply to it. So on the screen, I'm showing you the sort of categories of approval criteria that apply to it. So we have the statewide planning goals. There are 14 that apply to Estacada. We have our own comprehensive plan, which has 12 goals to address. And then we have our development code, which has a few basically procedural requirements for legislative amendments. Next slide. So the staff report, the staff report describes in much more detail than I'm going to speak how the proposal does indeed satisfy these various approval criteria that apply to it. And if the city council agrees with our findings and with the planning commission's findings, then they will have the authority to adopt these amendments because they have found that it satisfies these approval criteria. So on the next slides, I'm going to summarize, just briefly summarize how the package satisfies those criteria. Like I said, I'm doing this at a high level. You don't want me to read everything that's in the staff report. It's 34 pages. So if there's any questions at the end of this about the specifics of some of these findings, we can get into that in the questions part. After I go through these findings, I'm going to hand it over to the project consultants to talk about in more detail about the content of the TSP. Next slide, please. Okay, so I have bundled the goals by topic. You'll notice if you look at the statewide planning goals and the city's comprehensive plan goals, they pretty closely align with each other. So it's probably most efficient to kind of bundle these. And what I've also done is labeled the statewide planning goals have the letter S in front of them, and then the city's goal has the letter C. So the first few of the goals are all procedural. These goals require the city to involve the community in the planning process and decision-making process, requires us to follow the land use planning goal is a requirement to follow the established comprehensive planning process and requirement that applies to all cities. And then a requirement to coordinate with relevant agencies when we're developing these plans. So the staff report describes how the city did carry out all of these requirements. And I just wanted to note here, I want to commend the project team for really going above and beyond on the really robust public engagement that we did for this project. Providing, and we're going to get into a little more detail on this, but we provided across the almost 2 years now, a number of different, really wide variety and numerous different types of engagement opportunities and formats to try to reach the most people and make it easier for a lot of people to get their voices heard. Next slide, please. Okay, so this first bundle of goals at the top, these relate to natural resources and recreation. The proposal meets these goals with solutions that protect environmental and scenic resources and that provide access to key recreational opportunities. The second bundle on this page here, these relate to environmental quality and hazards. And the proposal meets these goals with recommendations that support emergency response during natural disaster, that support access to alternative fuel sources, that encourage reduction in trips, and that seek opportunities to combine transportation projects with other infrastructure and environmental mitigation projects. Next slide, please. Economic development goals are supported by solutions that provide access to key employment centers and essential destinations, and that promote the efficient movement of freight and support tourism. Housing goals are supported by providing transportation infrastructure to accommodate both existing and future residential neighborhoods. Public facility goals are met by this plan to provide all of these various transportation facilities that we're going to talk about as prioritized in the plan. Energy goals are advanced by projects and policies that reduce vehicle miles traveled, improve fuel efficiency, and support alternative fuel sources. And the urbanization goal is supported by policies and projects that accommodate forecasted housing and employment growth, that encourage efficient transportation facility development within our existing urban growth boundary, thereby delaying the need for an urban growth boundary expansion. Next slide, please. Okay, finally, the most relevant goal to this proposal is statewide planning goal 12 and our comprehensive plan goal 10, which is transportation. And so the state has something called the Transportation Planning Rule, or TPR, and this specifies what must be included in a local transportation planning effort and what must be addressed and included in your transportation system plan. And so this TSP that we're presenting today was developed in accordance with the state's TPR requirements and in support of the overall goal that's up on the screen here of providing a safe, convenient, and economic transportation system. And so our consultants and Alan are next going to talk more specifically about the recommendations included in this proposal that ultimately support this goal. Next slide. I think this is my last slide. Yeah. So, so just reminding you where we're at here. First, we're going to hear from John Bosket with DKS, one of our project consultants, going to have an overview of the TSP process and content. We're also going to hear from, I think, Matt Hasty with MIG to talk about the code amendments that are associated with the TSP to implement the TSP. And then we're going to hear from our senior planner, Alan, to talk about the airport-related policy and code amendments and describe the change that we are now proposing to that rezone solution we had originally proposed. After all of that, just a reminder, we're going to take questions from the Planning Commission first, then we're going to have a 5-minute break, then we're going to go into public testimony and then discuss and decide. Okay.
All right, I think you can go forward 2 slides. Thank you. So just as part of my presentation here, I thought I'd just backtrack a little bit and remind everybody on what the TSP is, why it was important to get it updated now. Talk about the process that we went through, and then just an overview of the plan, really just focusing on what's significantly different from the current transportation system plan. Then we'll transition to the code amendments discussion, as Taylor mentioned. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So Taylor mentioned this earlier, but again, the transportation system plan, which you do have one, was adopted in 2007. It's an extension of your comprehensive plan. It represents the transportation element. So it goes into, quite a bit more detail than just the policy statements in the comprehensive plan. And it outlines plans for future projects and policies to help you provide the transportation system that you need to align with your growth expectations. And that it's addressing kind of your major modes of transportation, primarily, driving, transit, forms of walking and biking. Go to the next slide. So obviously, the importance of having your TSP and keeping it updated. One is your regional partners like the county and the state also need to kind of update their long-range plans and know where their investments need to be made in their transportation systems. So this is an opportunity to coordinate with those partners who, they did have representatives on our stakeholder group and throughout this project. So it's a good opportunity to do that. Also, obviously, there's been a lot of growth in the community recently. And so updating your TSP is a time to kind of recalibrate and hopefully get your plans for your infrastructure in ahead of a lot of that growth. So you get the facilities that you need to support future development. And having plans in your TSP is also very important to be competitive for any kind of grant funding you may be pursuing. A lot of times it's almost a pass-fail criteria because the folks with the money, before they give somebody a grant, they like to see that demonstration that there's already been community support and consideration for the project. So having an adopted TSP goes a long, long way. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, your current TSP was originally adopted in 2007. There were some subsequent minor updates in 2011, 2016, and 2018. And now I can't remember what all three of those were, but I know one of them was from the downtown Riverside area plan. And the 2018 one I know is from the active transportation plan. So some other focused area studies were done, and the results of them were incorporated into your current TSP. However, those growth forecasts that started back in 2007 and projected out to the year 2030, that was the farthest that went for planning at that point. Those were not updated during those subsequent amendments. And obviously with the growth that's happened in the community, that was one of the key drivers of the need to update this, despite the fact that those minor updates had happened in the past. Let's see. So yes, obviously this is an opportunity not only to recalibrate and look at the growth expectations through the next 20 years, but to kind of clean up, get all of those subsequent amendments, which many of them aren't actually in the 2007 document. You've got, it references another document. So it's an opportunity to pull a lot of that work into one spot. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So process-wise, this was about a 19-month process leading up to today, where we went through different stages where we revisited the goals that we, and outcomes that we wanted to achieve for transportation with the community and our stakeholder group, which had guided us along the rest of the process here, reevaluated kind of what's working, where the gaps are, what needs to be, fixed. Work through different types of solutions to address that. So updating the project lists and then forming it all together into this draft plan. And through that process, we were guided through not only the public outreach periods, we had 2 major public outreach periods in the project, but 4 briefings with the city's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, our stakeholder group, which included quite a few representatives of kind of different folks in the community, as well as public agencies, and then 4 city council work sessions. And I will note that all the background material and the documents and the meeting summaries that we generated along the way, they're all included in volume 2 of the TSP. Volume 2 was not adopted, but it's kind of your archive, your historical archive of everything that we did leading up to what is volume 1, which is that's the part you're adopting. So that is available for reference. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, on the process, just speaking a little bit to the public outreach. I know Taylor mentioned before, the team used a lot of different ways to try to inform the community of the process going on, encourage them to engage in it as they were able to do so. And so that included a lot of things like fact sheets and flyers that were posted around the city. We had a project website running the whole time, and some social media posts through the city's Facebook and Instagram accounts to advertise for the project, and especially those public outreach periods. As I mentioned, there are two open houses at kind of key points in the project. So we were physically here in this room talking to community members. At the same time, we had online open houses running that were open for, I think, about 3 weeks each time. So if someone wasn't able to attend the in-person, all of the same content was available online. There was some canvassing done where we had folks just walking downtown, handing out flyers and letting people know about the project. Tabling event at a WhatsApp Estacada event down at the library. There was also just some one-on-one interviews with a number of stakeholders that represented business owners, transit providers, low-income residents, senior citizens, school transportation, and people with disabilities. Press releases in Estacada News. There are notices in the city's newsletter. We had an interested parties list that was maintained so we could do email blasts. And then there was a youth outreach event through Ant Farm that was used to help get local kids engaged in the process, talk about, what their needs were. You can go to the next slide. So again, as I mentioned, the TSP itself comes in those 2 volumes. So I'm going to be obviously just focusing on volume 1, which is the part you're adopting. And then we'll switch gears to the code amendments. So you can go to the next slide. So just have a few slides here talking about, again, what are the significant changes from the existing TSP? Because while it's going to look a lot different than your old one, there's a lot of the same stuff in there, and that it's got, updated goals and objectives. It's got new project lists. It's got, updated standards in there. So a lot of the content is the same, or at least as far as the types of things that are in there. But kind of the key changes were, one, as I mentioned, goals and objectives, and that's kind of guides the whole process and even maybe some of your future decision-making. Those were revisited again with our stakeholder group, and we kind of ran those by city council at briefings and engaged the community in those as well. So maybe the focus may have shifted a little bit in some areas. New growth assumptions, obviously, those are based on the most recent housing needs analysis and economic opportunities analysis. So we've updated that in the horizon years, pushed out to, is it 2042? Yeah, I'm blank. 2042, I believe it was. So yeah, from 2030, which was the current TSP. The street functional classifications and the locations of some of the future collector streets were updated. I don't think there were a ton of huge changes to that, and that's the map right there. But kind of given where some of the development has happened and the new growth projections, and maybe some of the natural features challenges, we went back and refined some of the locations of those streets. So that was updated. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The typical street design, so how you might build your collector streets and your local streets, that was refined a little bit. A lot of it, I don't think it was huge changes from the existing TSP, other than a lot of it was clarification, because there was a lot of options in the existing TSP. And so we're trying to make it easier to determine what dimensions you should be using. But also provided some flexibility in doing that. So there was a little bit of cleanup there, I think. And the collectors themselves, we modified those cross sections to provide better bicycle facilities on all the collector streets. And then through the active transportation plan, there were a number of street segments where special designs were actually already adopted through that 2018 update. but we pulled those into the main document itself. So now everything's in one place. Mobility standards were also updated. So when somebody's doing a traffic impact study and they're assessing congestion levels at intersections, your current TSP had, I believe, like a level service D was the threshold they needed to meet. We've adjusted those and kind of gave different standards, whether it's a two-way stop or a traffic signal, so on and so forth. So it's not quite a one size fits all, and it's also based on the amount of growth that we're projecting. So it hopefully aligns better. It's kind of a more reasonable fit. And the funding projections were updated. And again, that helps us ultimately kind of determine which projects we think we can fund through the existing revenue streams. And it will provide some guidance for setting SDC rates. And then the project lists themselves were obviously significantly updated, not only because we're basing this on new growth assumptions, but there's I think a much better balance of project types. I think the last TSP was largely just the new streets, and all those are all in there. Now we have a pretty big mix of projects that also make sure that we're providing lots of walking and biking facilities, improving access to transit. And a lot of those things came from the active transportation plan that was already done. We just pulled those forward and maybe enhanced them a little bit here and there where needed. There's also new high priority project lists. I don't think we're in the past TSP. So again, that was using the feedback that we got from the committees, from city council, from our stakeholder group in the community through the outreach periods on where we were seeing a lot of the common ground and people saying that certain projects were really important to the community. We wanted to preserve that for just to guide future decision making. And there's a financially constrained project list, which is a little bit different than that high priority project list. That the high priority one is not constrained by how much money you think you have. It's just kind of that wish list of the highest, or most popular projects. The financially constrained one is kind of a combination of that, but it aligns with that funding projection. So when we were kind of estimating how much funding we thought you were going to have, which projects do we think those aligned with? In this case, because a lot of that future funding is coming from system development charges, which can't be spent on any project. There are restrictions how you can spend those. We also accounted for that. And that again will help form the basis for SDC rate updates. But also if anybody comes along in the future and wants to do a comprehensive plan amendment, they have to do a traffic study typically that assesses if they're going to have any, that would have any additional impact on the transportation system. And when they do that, they can't assume that all the projects in the TSP will be there to help offset that difference in growth. But the projects that are on the financial constraint list, they can't assume are in place. So those are defined. And let's see, go ahead and go. I'm a slide ahead of you, I think. There we go. No, that's the one. There was also some special consideration in this update given to things like addressing recreational access, emergency evacuations, electric vehicle charging, and a potential for future bike share system. And so there was some kind of policy direction given for those to explore some of those further or encourage partnerships. In some cases, some of those ended up as projects in the project list. And then I believe lastly, as part of the goals and objectives of this project, there was a goal related to equity. So as we went through this process, we used a kind of what we called an equity lens, with just some criteria to help us with our outreach process and trying to provide a lot of ways to reach a lot of different community members and help everyone engage. But then also just looked at the outcomes of the TSP themselves. So I think that is the end of my next slide. And Brandon or Matt, I don't know what you have to do are they ready to jump in whenever, or do you have to engage them?
This is Matt. Can you hear me?
We can.
I'm ready to jump in, but I get a message that says I can't start my video because the host has stopped it. So you can see my face up there, I think, but not my face moving. Anyway, but yes, I will jump in and cover these 3 slides, and then Brandon and or I will be available to answer questions. And I'll turn my video on at some point if I can. So yeah, I'm going to talk about at a high level proposed amendments to your municipal code. Just 3 slides on this, and then I think we're going to stop, take questions, and then Alan will talk about the airport related code and zoning overlay amendments. So in terms of the other code amendments, kind of 3 overarching goals here in terms of updating the code. First, just to make sure that the code is consistent with the TSP. So that's just sort of one basic objective. 2, your TSP covers a full range of different types of travel modes. And so want to make sure that your code similarly, is addressing these multimodal, objectives and recommendations. And 3, making sure that as development occurs, as guided by your development code, that it's supported by the transportation system and vice versa. So next one, please. So a few kind of key changes to the code. One, just updating the code just to indicate that transportation uses are allowed in each zoning district. Right now, you've got sort of statements throughout the code that says they're allowed in this zone, outright use here, conditional use there. So we basically updated the code to identify that in just a couple places in the code. It applies to all those zones. So it's just making it more consistent and clear. And then a fair bit of update to your requirements around traffic impact studies. So a couple of things here. One, sort of instituting kind of a 2-tiered system with some thresholds for when a traffic impact study is required. And if projects sort of fall below that level, then they have to provide still something, but it's a traffic assessment letter. And it's just not as detailed as a full traffic impact study. And then have been pretty specific about what the requirements are for the traffic impact study itself in terms of the methodology that needs to be used, the type of information, et cetera. So when you look at the specific code amendments, you'll see a fair bit of language around traffic impact studies in there in terms of the changes, and really just trying to update your code to be consistent with best practices and make sure it makes sense and that the requirements are sort of tied to the relative impact of different types of projects. And then create an airport overlay zone. Again, Alan will talk about that in more detail. And then also just make sure that when you're notifying folks about development applications, if a transportation provider is impacted, that they're getting notification about those development proposals or applications. So it's just making sure that all these folks listed on the screen are notified when those things are in process or occurring. So next slide, please. So a few other proposed changes, some proposed changes to requirements associated with bicycle and pedestrian facilities, particularly, and these are partly in line with both best practices and making sure you've got adequate facilities for people to walk and bike through larger developments or through larger parking areas. These are also things that are required by the state through the transportation planning rules. So making sure that you do have those facilities in particularly those larger developments so that people can safely walk or bicycle to get to where they need to go within those larger developments. Also allowing you all to impose conditions of approval for transportation related improvements. And that's partly, to some degree that was already there, but making that more consistent in your code. And then updating the roadway classifications in terms of the design of those facilities, sort of the basic design requirements. So there's a new category for neighborhood local streets, standards for alternative designs. Really the only arterial there is the state highway. So kind of removing that designation and then making some changes to the major collector design requirements. and then making sure that we're including sidewalks, bike lanes, and landscape strip dimensions within the cross-section design standards for those types of roads. And then also increasing access spacing for major and minor collectors. So you make sure that, you don't have so many access points that traffic can't move effectively and efficiently along those roads. So those are the types of changes. It's not a huge number of changes to your code, but a number of important changes to meet those overall objectives that I talked about a moment ago. I think that's my last one. Go ahead and go to the next one and see. Yep. I still can't show my face, but that's okay.
Do we want to pause here and just, Matt, did you want to take code specific questions at this point?
I'm happy to. Brandon and I are happy to do that. It's kind of up to you all.
If you don't have a time constraint, we were going to ask everyone to hold their questions until the end of Alan's piece here, if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
I have a little bit of a time constraint. I'll have to jump off probably around 3, but Brandon will still be here and he can answer questions as well about the code amendments. He really did the bulk of the work here. So I would say let's go ahead and have you talk about the airport provisions. And then if I'm still here and I can help answer code questions, that's great. And if not, then Brandon can definitely take care of it. So
Okay.
does that sound
great.
okay?
Yep.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's good. Thanks,
Awesome.
Matt.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about the airport code and comp plan amendments. So I'll give a bit of an overview, just kind of how those came to be. Go to the next slide, please.
Hey, Alan, before you get into that,
Yeah, sure.
which piece of artwork are you working off of here?
So artwork.
So we got one that has a blue tab on it. I believe everybody has this. That's dated the 15th.
There is an updated, yes. So the ordinance itself is exhibit 1 of the staff report. And then the ordinance has its own exhibits, so those are lettered. So exhibit 1C is the exhibit of the ordinance that has all of the code amendments in it. And so we have made more recent changes to the airport related code amendments. Those are shown in that updated like that separate exhibit with the blue tab that has the date on the top that's labeled updated 11/15/23. For the online folks, this is uploaded to the meeting page for today also.
So
And-
portions of this are in the rest of it. So you-
Yes.
Okay.
This will, if everyone agrees with what's in this updated airport code piece, this is what we'll get. This is how the airport related pieces will get updated in exhibit 1-C, which is all of the code amendments combined together.
Okay.
And I'll also be talking about 1-B,
Okay.
which is the comp plan. Yeah, so it's basically those two. Okay, so yeah, just a brief overview of how these amendments came to be. So in early 2022, an application to annex a property into the city. This property was near the airport. That was submitted, and as the planning department began to process that application, it became evident that the city's development code was missing a crucial chapter. So Estacada has an airport designation on its comp plan map. Do you want to go back just one? So yeah, that is the airport designation, and that's just a screenshot of the comp plan map. So I'm gonna go forward again. Thanks. But it doesn't have an airport plan or an airport zoning code. So there are no standards around what could or couldn't exist in the airport zone. And it's a state requirement that cities with airports in their UGB have an airport plan and code standards for the airport zone. So not having airport policies or code language has left the city open to lawsuits. And so in February of this year, the council discussed prioritizing the preservation of the airport by developing code language and policies specifically for the airport zone. So all this year, planning staff has been working with state agencies, that's the Oregon Department of Aviation, DLCD, as well as council and planning commission yourselves, to develop solutions to these issues that involve the airport. And that is what I'll be presenting in the next few minutes. And we're including these proposed airport amendments with the TSP as a package, as Taylor was describing, and will be adopted together. Next slide, please. So the amendments package for the airport is composed of three main components, and I will go over each of these in more detail shortly. So there's the comp plan amendments. That's added in revised languages to chapters 6, 10, and 12. There are very minimal changes to chapters 6 and 12. And the major changes are to chapter 10, which deals with transportation. And then there's the airport base zone code, and that would create a new chapter in our development code. And that corresponds to the existing airport zone designation. And then finally, there's the airport safety and compatibility overlay zone code. That's also a new chapter in the development code. And that's similar to what the county has in place right now, except that ours would be more detailed and specific to Valley View Airport. Okay, next slide. Okay, so more about the comp plan amendments. So chapter 6, like I said, not very many amendments to that, just some changes to the noise subsection. We removed outdated references and fixed some unclear language, and some policy items were moved from that section to a new section in chapter 10, transportation, that deals with airport. And then chapter 10, where most of the changes happened. So the existing transportation chapter only addresses land-based travel and says nothing about the airport. So with the TSP update and these airport amendments, we're proposing to split this chapter into two sections. So section 1 would contain the TSP that addresses land-based travel, and then section 2 would contain the airport plan, which it would address airport-related issues. And that would give background about the airport, establishes the scope of the airport safety overlay zone, provide context on state rules and the city's responsibility to regulate the airport area, and also establish objectives and policies to support and protect the airport as a valuable resource for the region. Okay, and finally, chapter 12, very small, minor changes there. We just drafted some slight changes, removing outdated language and adding some clarifications. So next slide, please. Okay, and now about the base zone, the airport zone code itself. So this zone code section, it satisfies statewide planning goal 12. It implements the city's new comp plan policies relating to the airport. It would support the continued operation of the Valley View Airport. And importantly, it takes the city out of the legal jeopardy that it's currently in, as we described before. It also allows certain airport-related commercial, residential, and recreational uses, such as, next slide. Okay, I'll give everyone a second to look over this. Most of these are flight-related. It does include some agricultural and forestry activities, as well as allowing for one single-family home or duplex per lot. And that last point I'll come back to in a few minutes. Okay, next slide. And then some of the conditionally allowed uses, they include aeronautical uses of kind of a more sporty nature, and also include government and public utility uses. Okay, next slide. Okay, and for the development standards section of the base zone code, we're proposing a two-pronged approach. So for residential uses, applying the R1 standards, and then for all other uses, applying standards of the M1 light industrial zone. Okay. Yeah, it's okay. It's fine. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this overlay zone will also be its own chapter. As I mentioned, would establish an area over the airport and beyond it. And that's in order to establish compatibility and safety standards and to promote air navigational safety, and that includes height, additional height limitations. And this is all with the goal of reducing hazards for residents, workers, and people flying in and out of the airport. And the overlay code will also would also require the following. Next slide. It would require that notice be sent to the Oregon Department of Aviation and the airport owner of any land use or permit applications that are under the overlay zone. It outlines procedural requirements around land use and permit applications. It restricts uses in the runway protection zone, airport surface, and airport impact areas, protects existing non-conforming uses, and would also limit the expansion of non-conforming uses to minimize hazards. Okay, next slide. Okay, and now to the comp plan map proposal that the city had previously proposed. So we were proposing that the comp plan map be changed, and you can see the properties there outlined in blue. And the proposal was to rezone all those properties from airport to low-density residential or R1. And the city's intention was to make sure that the owners of those properties were able to develop or renovate their properties in ways that are complementary to the airport. And since most of those properties are residential, we worried that applying a new airport zoning standard that prohibited residential uses would unfairly prevent owners from making improvements or additions to their homes. And there were different ways to approach solving that problem. And one of the ways is to rezone those properties as R1 low-density residential. The city sent out notices about this proposal, and we heard from a number of property owners, some of whom may be here today, who had concerns about it. And I personally have spoken to several people, emailed with several folks this week. And in light of all the feedback we received, we've reconsidered the proposal and we made some changes. So next slide. Okay, so basically we are no longer proposing to rezone any of the properties adjacent to the airport, but instead we are proposing to allow low-density residential uses outright in the airport zone. And that's in order to allow property owners to develop their properties in ways that would work well with the airport. We'd also be requiring we're recommending requiring large minimum lot sizes to prevent urban density residential subdivisions, requiring a buffer around the runway as well, where no residential uses would be allowed. Okay, next slide. So just to sum up, allowing one single-family home or duplex per lot in the airport zone, requiring a minimum lot size of 2 acres to discourage subdivision of airport zone properties, and finally to prohibit any residential uses within 200 feet of the edge of the runway. And that is it for the airport amendments. And I'll hand it back to Taylor.
All righty. Thank you, Alan and John and Matt. So just to reiterate and remind, with all of these proposal components in mind, we reviewed the approval criteria that apply to this proposal. We found that all of the approval criteria are indeed met by this proposal and that the proposal advances the existing goals of the city and the statewide planning goals. And so our staff recommendation is to approve this ordinance, adopting the TSP and these airport amendments. And so with that, we want to open it up for the Planning Commission to ask any questions about the report and proposal that we just presented. And Tara Perkins is present. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Planning Commission, questions?
Of course.
All right, let's start at the end.
You can unshare
Work
the
north to south.
screen.
That's you.
Is that looking at the map? We should have the map back up
Oh,
there.
I'm sorry.
All right.
First question, and it just dawned on me, this was a little bit of a surprise. I read through this whole packet you gave me on getting carpal tunnel yesterday. Thank you both, Alan and Emily. No, Evelyn. I can't even read my name no more. Anyway, have we annexed the airport and the surrounding east properties?
We have not. It's within our urban growth boundary. So it
Really?
will at some point become eligible for annexation. But it's not yet annexed. And there are a few criteria for annexation. You have to be adjacent to existing city limits. You have to,
Yeah,
There's
I
a few criteria
understand
in
the
the
cherry stem and the
Right, right.
property line has to hit somewhere. was everybody that has property there aware of this zone change or whatever coming along?
Yep, we followed the standard.
You sent
public
everybody
noticing.
a postcard.
Yep.
Okay, except me. All right. All right, because I just got caught off hand when I just looked up there. And so this is all inside the safety fly zone of the airport then.
There are a few different types of safety zones and
So I
surfaces and
found out
buffers,
yesterday.
but yes, all of those are accounted for in the safety overlay that we're proposing.
All right. I'm gonna turn it over to my partner here for now.
Don, you got any questions? Ryan, Scott?
I beat you up, didn't I? I'm sitting
No, I
here
don't
soaking
want
it in.
to do it.
I do not have any questions. I want to commend the city staff for their outreach and work. This has been an extraordinary challenge, and the fact that you've been open and collaborative up to and including the final minute, where after speaking with community and stakeholders, a last minute adjustment was made to meet the voices of the people who participated in that. And I thought it was an extremely thorough job. It was a pleasure to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple clarifiers. Mainly around the airplane or airport zone. Under page 9 of 15 on the latest rendition here that you sent us. Let me get it correct here. Item number 4, excavation and fill. A plan should be submitted showing cubic yards removed or filled, and plan should be certified by a registered professional engineer. Where does that come from?
That comes from the R1 zone. Like for the stand, like it would be 16.16.040.
Is that enforced?
Good.
And my only reasoning is if we have things in here that aren't enforced, it doesn't do any good to have them in there. So I would advise striking it because 50 yards doesn't amount to much. I mean, it could be putting 4 inches of gravel over a long driveway.
Okay.
And so if we're not, again, enforcing something, I would advocate for striking it.
Okay.
I concur.
And then also item 8 on that, structural and facade design.
Yeah, same. That would be from the R1 standards.
When did we, and sorry, I should know this because I build in the city periodically, and if this comes from the code, it just seems like very basic things that, again, you could look at every window or every house in the city and it would meet these. So again, why would we have them if it's something so basic?
I agree. I think it would be really hard for someone to sell a house if they didn't have at least 3 of these really basic design features on it.
So again,
But yeah, we just pulled from our existing residential code, but that doesn't mean we don't have to do that, right? We can absolutely take some of these out that don't
For sure.
seem to make sense. I don't know when that got put in. That's been there the whole time that I've worked. here.
I just come from the less is more train of thought that if we're not enforcing or actively doing anything, or if they're so simple that every house has a window and a recessed area and a covered porch or yada yada. I mean, if everybody's meeting, and let's just get rid of them. But I don't know if I have latitude to make that recommendation. So just a couple thoughts that came to mind. And again, I echo what Ryan said of making the late last minute adjustment for some of these amendments. So I don't have anything further at this point in time. I've seen the transportation system plan enough that I feel like I know most of it front and back. And we've talked through it several times in public forums. So with that, do we want to take a break or do we want to just roll right into public hearings?
Let's see if Tara joined, I believe. And if you can probably now.
Tara, if you have
unshare.
any
screen.
questions
Oh, there we
or comments, now would be a great time. We'll have another opportunity later after public testimony.
You might need to
Doesn't look
ask
like-
her to unmute. Oh, she's a panelist. Okay.
So it doesn't look like she has anything. Planning commission, it's kind of up to us. If we want to just keep trudging along, we're only into this an hour. I'm fine, but I don't speak for everybody. So if we want to take a quick 5-minute recess, we can. If not, let's just keep trudging along.
Take a break.
Take a break.
5-minute break.
5-minute break. We're gonna reconvene at 3:05.
3:05.
Hit it harder. Like you.
Thank you. What'd you say? Okay. We're not quite started yet.
We'll go
Unless
ahead.
you wanna, yeah.
Yeah, we'll just go ahead and open the planning commission meeting back up. Reconvening from where we left off, talking about TSP and the new regulations for the airport zoning code and the overlays involved with it. So at this point in time, we've had some discussion at the planning commission. We're going to close the planning commission hearing and we will open the public hearing. So I'm going to say some words. This is a new one. We're going to open the public hearing here at 3:09, and I'm going to read a statement about the evidence presented at the hearing. An issue which may be basis for appeal to the city council must be raised prior to the close of record at the final evidentiary hearing on the specific application. Such issues shall be raised with sufficient specificity as to afford the city council and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. Failure of an issue to be raised at the hearing in person or by letter, or failure to provide sufficient specificity to afford the city council and other parties an adequate opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the city council on that issue. So typically we would have an applicant on this, but we have a couple, and in this situation, it's just code we're adopting and a transportation system plan. So we have asked that anybody wanting to speak, fill out one of these speaker request forms. We have 2. And we will start with the transportation system plan and try to group these together. So we have Jordan Winthrop. You're our first speaker. Jordan, we'll give you 3 minutes up here. And if you could just, do we need to restate address since I have it on paper here?
I don't know. Do they need to restate their address if we have it on paper? No.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Jordan, go ahead and introduce yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Jordan Winthrop. Thank you for having me up here. So I'm really happy that we're updating the transportation safety plan. I actually rode my bicycle down here, and there's been many areas in Estacada that have needed updating with bicycle lanes and sidewalks and things like that, which I see a lot of that stuff has definitely been addressed in here. I'm in a role where I am promoting tourism in Estacada, and I believe that transportation equals tourism, and the easier it is to make people travel around the town, the easier it is for them to shop local. And I see a lot of that in this plan to make it more walkable and bikeable once people get here. I also drive an RV that's 40 feet in this town, and some of the bump outs have definitely made it a little bit challenging to get it home. But when I'm riding a bicycle, I also see why some of those bump outs are safe for that as well. So I'm really happy with that. One of the things that while I'm up here, I wanted to point out was some of the goals. I was reading the TSP, and the goals on like page 28 in your guys' handout, like C5, S5, and S8 were the goals specifically I was looking at that this does meet. But it also reminded me that when you guys are approving the new sewer plan, it doesn't necessarily meet those goals either. So I'm trying to create open space, certain things that that you guys are trying to help make sure happens in the transportation system plan. I don't feel that happened in the decision for the sewer plan. And one of those things would be definitely keeping open space, and preserving like park-like structures and open, like the bicycle pathway from Timber Park to downtown, I think could be compromised by that sewer plant. So I just want to point that out.
All right, thank you, Jordan. Next up, we have Mary Etheridge. Speaking with regards to the airport, it looks like.
Well, everything I wrote up was basically what was going on before you talked about changing things, changing the plan. But I am still going to speak to what I had planned to say before. I didn't like in the verbiage when it said public hearing airport that the city is also proposing offering to redesignate those airport adjacent properties to the low density residential R1. Those words, no cost until the property is annexed into the city limits. And the city is not proposing to annex any properties into city limits. Individual property owners may request annexation into city limits if they meet the criteria for annexation. That's what red flagged me. Every time I see a place, an area go in being annexed, then it's like the domino effect. Then the next place, one property owner will say, I'm going to annex this into the city. They meet all their criteria, bordering the city limits. And there's the 4 criteria, any which way, it just goes right into the domino effect. So to me, that was really saying, we're going to start getting some more development around the airport. And I just can't see that. I want to keep the airport. We've already got, I love the TSP plan, mind you. I came here to say, please pass that. They've worked so hard on it. I've been a little bit involved, but I just know all the people that came down Lawrence Road, talked about it, the paper, just looked at all that stuff. But then you coupled it with the airport, and it's kind of like the House and the Senate, where one plan is fantastic, and then all of a sudden you throw the airport in and you've got all this other funk that's not good. And so, I'm into saying, look at that transportation plan, pass it, but please pause for a while on that airport. When I came to the last meeting with Digger Dan that lived up that property next to the airport, you guys said nothing was going to be happening till after 2036, zoned to be airport. Whoever buys it can request a zone change. And that it said whoever buys it then in 2036 can change it to R1 if they want to. So this was all going to be down the road. But all of a sudden, if one person along the airport, we've got growth along the west side of the airport. We've got along the south with Current Creek too. We've got it, coming up from Deuce. So if you drive around those areas, you see that a lot of them are already developing, annexed. You've got Cascadia Ridge and Faraday Hills, all right there by the airport. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
What was your first name?
Mary Etheridge.
So we don't have any other speaker forms filled out.
Okay.
Is that the new historically?
Evelyn,
is that the
did
new
we
standard
have
we're gonna fill
anyone
out in advance?
that signed up for online?
For Zoom.
Just for Zoom?
Just for Zoom.
Okay,
Just for Zoom, yes. So if anyone in the audience wanted to speak, they could.
okay. So do
Yeah.
we have anybody online that wants to speak? Okay. So we've checked that box for right now. If there's anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on any of these topics, the public hearing topics, I don't want to open that up too wide, but the TSP adoption and or the airport plan, you're more than welcome to come to the mic. We'll give you 3 minutes and you can do that.
I heard some good questions out there. I don't want to put you on the spot, Ralph, but yeah, some good questions. And I think this would be the time.
Hi, Ralph Hudson, live on the airport, one of the properties. Looking at the map, and we've got a section of yellow and then blue and then yellow again. And it's not clear to me what is actually the zoning of the yellow regions as compared to the blue. I live in the blue. I understand 2 lots or 2 acres and 1 resident.
Ralph, hang on just a sec. Let's pause this time real quick. Can we bring up that map so we can talk and everybody can see what we're doing? Is this the map you're referring to, Ralph?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead. Oh. All right.
So between the dotted line, I live in the blue area. But we have a yellow above it, yellow below it. Now, I know there's a lot of houses yellow below it that are on the airport. And they're also on 2-acre lots. They're also single family. So what is the difference between the yellow and blue?
So let me take a stab at it. Is that all right? Sure. And then correct me when I'm wrong. So the red and white line is the urban growth boundary. That is our limit by the state for the city of Escada to develop. We have to meet a bunch of requirements to develop beyond that around the perimeter of the city of Escada. The black and white line, I believe, is the city limits currently. Is that correct? And so as it goes down, and you can see down in the bottom left, you can see Curran Creek Drive and the small little lots. Those are developed houses currently abutting those big 2 and 2 acre lots just to the right of it where the blue meets the yellow. And as it disappears out of the screen there, that city limit goes south, goes west, and then comes back up. And where the black and white line kind of ties into the red, that is the current developments going on by, I think, Cedar Ridge Homes. Not that the names matter right now. So everything to the top side of the black and white lines is outside of the city limits, but inside the urban growth boundary. And so the requirement for us is to adopt this airplane overlay to meet state requirements. Is that right?
Yes.
Does that help,
And-
Ralph?
So you were asking what the difference is between the purple or the yellow and blue. So the yellow is the R1. All those properties are zoned low density residential R1. And the purple or blue is the airport designation.
Single family, 2 acres.
Which
Uh,
we are, yes, we're
That's the
proposing
proposal. Yes.
to apply the 2 acre minimum lot size in that airport zone. I want to back up here. So this is our current map. Part of the issue is that we've always had this airport zone designation on our comprehensive plan map. This map shows all the land within our urban growth boundary, whether or not it's annexed in yet. It shows what the zoning designation should be whenever those properties eventually come into city limits. So we have this zoning designation on our comprehensive plan map for the airport property and those properties around the airport. And that tells us, okay, if any one of these property owners came to the city and asked to annex, the default would be to apply whatever zoning is shown on the comprehensive plan map. Part of the problem that we're trying to solve today is that we're supposed to also have a zoning district that has a whole code chapter that sets the standards and requirements for that zone, so that whenever a property comes into the city limits, we look at the zoning map and say, okay, it's supposed to be zoned like this. Now let's look at our code and say, what are the uses and the standards that we have to require for that property? We don't have that zone chapter for the airport zone. So that's part of the problem and we're legally required to. So that's part of the problem that we're trying to solve with this package of amendments, is to have zoning code to go along with our map designation. And then to answer your question, yes, the minimum lot size for that blue zone is, we're proposing for it to be 2 acres to discourage residential, like urban density residential development around the airport. And however, some of those properties, as you pointed out, some of those 2 acre airport properties are still designated the yellow R1 low density residential. And that's not something that we would be able to fix with this package of amendments, but it is something that from these discussions, this is my personal opinion, I think it would make a lot of sense to apply the airport zoning to those properties to accomplish the same goal of making sure that that urban urban density residential development doesn't encroach over onto the airport.
Question. With him. Or for him. So all of those lots are not currently built on? All of those lots.
Most
are
of them
all-
are, however, there are one or two that are shown to be vacant.
Okay, all right. So currently you're under county jurisdiction. Yeah. All right, now I'm getting a little farther down the road.
Hey, hang on, if you have a question, I'll have you come up to the mic. Why don't you go ahead first and then he can come up next. Is that all right? And one last thing, that Ralph kind of spurred on in my head was some of those lots on the north to south plane that kind of align with the runway, they have both purple and yellow. Is that just because they're, at that point, it's 200 feet away from the runway?
I don't know why it was, our comprehensive plan map is a mystery to me sometimes. I don't know why those properties are split zoned like that. At some point in time, someone drew those zone boundaries onto this map. And yeah, the zone boundary does not line up with the property lines on a number of these properties, and I'm not sure why.
Can I ask a quick clarifier also? Is that neighborhood which currently exists, is that also under an HOA?
It's someone in here can probably say more than that, but it's something like an HOA at
It's
least.
called like
They-
an air park, I believe. Is that? Some of them are not. It's the ones on Sunview Lane, right?
Okay,
Are not the Sunview Lane ones on, so on the
Okay.
west side.
thank you.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Rod Landreth. My wife and I own one of the purple properties, the one with the niche to the east of the airport. 13 years ago, when we bought the property, I built a shop building that is within the 200 feet boundary you're talking about. At that time, I built it with all the information from the airport aeronautics division as far as the height of the building from the center of the runway. Is that building threatened by this?
It would not be threatened by that. Well, so first off, it's not within the city jurisdiction, so whatever we passed wouldn't apply right now, but also what you have is called a non-conforming existing use. So the code restrictions would apply to things that, like new things that would be built.
All right, so
And then-
existing structures are fine, as long as they're.
Be fine, exactly, yeah.
All right, that's
Yep.
my only question. Thank you.
Thanks, good question. All right, I think we had one or two more hands up out there. Go ahead, sir, come on up.
My name is George Cawthon, and I was the third property owner on Valley View Airport. And my question is, does the city have a map of the actual dimensions of the Valley View Airport?
Or you mean the dimensions of like the runway or the?
No, the whole airport there had to be a whole, I forget how many acres he bought, but it was a total airport at that time. And where we're seeing this question on these yellow blocks and stuff, all of that was inside the Valley View Airport property line.
Yeah, I think, I know we're doing this little, do you mind if I reply?
No, please do.
So Clackamas County has a Clackamas County Airport plan that is somewhere in the exhibits. And I think that the map that they show for the Valley View Airport, at least in the county's eyes, they established this map that defines the established official boundary of the Valley View Airport. And that map looks a lot more like what our comp plan map boundaries look like. They still don't align perfectly, but that's the only map that I'm aware of that has an older version of the airport boundary.
Well, the only reason I'm asking is when we moved there was no master plan for the airport. But the county came to Bob Veely and said, we want a master plan of the airport, and he could only develop so many lots. And now all of a sudden, we're seeing all these lots that we don't see how they're connected to the airport at all. And since we've lived there, the airport's been sold 3 times, so we got other problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we got one more question here. Oh, maybe a couple more.
Hello, my name is Diane Cawthon, and I live on the Valley View Air Park. And I was going to address the question about HOA. The Valley View Flying Community is not an HOA, but it is covered by CC&Rs. And we were discussing those yellow 2-acre blocks on the west side of the airport. All of those homes are built with single-family residents, and the CC&R that affects the original Clackamas County Valley View Airport plat specifies that none of those lots can be subdivided, and there is only to be 1 single-family residence per lot. So including those yellow blocks on the west side of the runway in the airport designation will not limit or reduce any use of the airport properties. It's just reinforcing the CC&Rs that are already there. I wanted to mention that. And then there are also some properties that I think are not included where the block of lettering is up on the upper right-hand corner, where it jogs in and goes out. That's the former FBO, I believe, is in that block of property, as well as another property with an airplane hangar on it that should be part of that airport usage, are currently and have historically had airport usage. And when you have that big hangar FBO building, I'm not sure what other use it would have other than an airport related use. And I believe the airport owner feels that she should be in the airport usage too, but I can't really speak for her. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my question, am I supposed to pick this up?
Yeah, please.
My question is about Lawrence Road. I'm not sure if this is even the right time to talk about Lawrence Road, but
Is it regarding the transportation plan?
yes.
Go ahead and we can discuss
Okay.
that.
So in 1995, my husband and I moved on to Lawrence Road. We moved there because we bought 5.5 acres on the end of a dead end street. That was my goal, a nice quiet place to live. According to the new changes to your plan, it looks like we're going to live on a major busy street. And I don't want that. I'm pretty sure Mary doesn't want that. I'm pretty sure the Neldner family doesn't want that. The Wagner family doesn't want that. The new guy, his family, his name's Chris. The Smith family down the road on Lawrence doesn't want that. I am horrified that my place to retire is disappearing. So I don't know if there's any recourse to doing that a different way. And I'm also kind of wondering if you're going to make Lawrence Road a 60-foot wide major collector, where is that property going to come from? My property, her property, my neighbor's property? I don't know how wide Lawrence Road is, but I'm guessing it's 20 feet, maybe 25 feet. It's not 60 feet. So that's all I got.
Thank you. Taylor, can you give a
Sure.
overview of?
Yeah, so the Lawrence Road recommendation is a unique one. But before I talk about that, none of the way that development happens is driven by individual private property owners. So none of the properties around you will develop until or unless one of the property owners decides to sell to a developer or develop it themselves. And then they have to submit an application to the city, and the city checks whether or not it meets the code. And if it does, then the city has to approve the development. What the plan does when it specifies that a certain street is supposed to be a minor collector, for example, what that means is not that the city's going to come in and build this street for the most part, unless it's called out as a special city project to build this street, which that is not called out for Lawrence Road. So what that means is that if or when the property owner comes in and says, I want to subdivide my property, we have to look at this map and say, okay, looks like the map says that you're supposed to build out one of the streets according to this, these extra standards associated with a minor collector. So all of that to say, none of that development, yes, Lawrence Road is designated to be bumped up to a minor or major collector in the plan, but that project, that's not a project that the city's going to come in and do. It would happen whenever some private property owner wants to develop their property, and then they have to meet the code. And then the other part of that is that the Lawrence Road reclassification is a little bit of a weird one because to answer your question, no, we're not intending for Lawrence Road to get built out to a 60-foot right of way. The reason that we bumped it up to, I think, a major collector standard is because our urban growth boundary runs right along the center line of Lawrence Road. And that means that we will never have control over the eastern half of that street. And as a lot of you probably know, Lawrence Road is currently a very narrow and in some places very dangerous street for passing traffic to travel on. And so as we were thinking about, how can the city address this safety issue when we don't have control over the entire width of the street, the solution that we landed on was, well, if we bump it up to a minor collector or major collector width, that means that whenever these properties come in and develop, we can require them to build slightly wider half street improvements. And so what we're going to get is a half street that is built to city standards that's a lot wider than it would be if it was built to local street standards. So you can think of it as our way of achieving a local street cross-section roughly, even though we don't have full control over the width of the street. I hope I didn't make that too confusing. Can she come back up to the mic?
Go ahead.
But you're already doing that. There are already people that are developing that are connecting to Lawrence Road. Right now, there's somebody in Marilyn Lloyd's property. He's cutting all the trees down. It'll be 9 acres. I believe there's going to be another 42 houses. Those houses will connect to Lawrence Road. Sam LeGros property, that's part of this thing with the airport. He wants to put 26 houses on the back of his property. It's my impression that those houses will also connect to Lawrence Road. None of these issues address the curve. They all connect before the curve, which means they're all going to be going in and out that curve down the creek and then entering into what's been stated as an already dangerous intersection at the end of Lawrence and Copeland.
Yeah.
Can we get your name for the record too?
Did I not say my name's Carrie Geyer? I live down at the end next to Aaron Neldner,
Thank you.
right where I believe the new water tank is going to go.
Do you want respond?
No, go ahead.
Do you want to respond to that? So yeah, there are several subdivision applications that have already been approved in that area. Unfortunately, we didn't have this standard in place for the one that is going to butt up against Lawrence Road. This is my personal opinion. Unfortunately, Kern Creek Estates Phase 2 was required by the council at the time to connect through to Lawrence Road, which was a decision that went against the recommendation of staff and the recommendation also of the developers themselves because of the concerns about that curve. But that was the decision that got made. And when we found out that that was the decision that the council was going to require that to punch through, we panicked a little bit because that is a safety concern. reached out to the county to find out if there was any way that the county and or city could somehow require that developer to construct off-site improvements on Lawrence Road to mitigate those issues. The county was not going to require anything. And it's really hard for the city to legally require off-site improvements that are not proportional. That's a legal, that word has legal significance, that are not proportional to the development that they're building. So our hands were tied on that, unfortunately. So this is one piece of a solution that really won't come until those properties along Lawrence develop. And that issue is absolutely on our radar, and we've got our eyes and ears open for opportunities for solutions. And maybe it's something that the city now has a traffic and public safety committee. That's something that we might be able to have them look at. What are some kind of interim solutions for that curve that, is there signage or like mirrors? But yeah, it's a hard problem. Yeah.
One statement we'll make about the TSP itself is the whole goal of it is to improve the transportation within the city limits and the surrounding area. And by getting it on paper and providing a plan that we can utilize in the future, we're trying to get people off of that Current Creek, Cascadia Ridge area in a lot of ways through the Holt Homes, and I don't know the street names, but down Current Creek and out to Deuce Road and down on the north side of Estacada, so they don't have to come past all the schools and through the heart of Estacada. So I would like to believe that if somebody had intent of dropping kids off, they may use Lawrence Road, but otherwise they would probably try to get out of town as quick as possible so they can avoid the other congestion within the city limits. And let's just keep our fingers crossed that all the people that are professionals at transportation things have created a plan that will work in due time. And there are different connectors that are going to take place across the school district property that will help with that as well. So I know that doesn't make you sleep any better at night, but there are plans in place to help mitigate some of the current traffic. Thanks. All right, we got one more here. All right, come on down. Go ahead and state your name, please.
John Reiser. I live on the airport in the blue. And I think like we've said, the lots where the city and the comprehensive, those three lots, they are on the airport. And those other lots, they are on the airport. So I'm wondering, the airport, you're going to redesignate the airport as low density housing, right?
The proposals to not rezone anything. That was we were going to, and then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
no rezoning.
what happens when the airport, when he decides to sell? What can he build on it? Right now, it's one lot, 60 acres, one lot, because of the proportioning of the city, of the county. And so now he's got one lot. What can he do with it if he sells?
If currently he's not yet annexed into city limits, so he can do whatever Clackamas County's land use approval and zoning tells him he can do. Clackamas County has an airport overlay. I don't think that they have an airport base zone. So I don't know how hard it would be for him to get it rezoned and like develop something different. He would not be able to subdivide. He would not be able to do an urban density subdivision because it's within our urban growth boundary. So Clackamas County does not require or does not allow subdivisions within urban growth boundaries. They would require the property to annex first into the city and go through the city subdivision process.
Okay, well, he bumps up against the city.
Yep. So if he annexes into city limits, then and if we have this new zoning applied that we're proposing, then we would first of all require him to meet all of the subdivision criteria. And if he could, then the zone would only allow him to subdivide as small as 2-acre lots. That's how it's currently written. Now, if there's something that we want to write in there to prevent the existing airport, the runway, basically the runway property from dividing at all, that's something we would need to add into the code because currently he could
When
split
we
it.
all bought the property, it was supposed to be in perpetuity that we'd have an airport. And, now we've got a kind of a developer owner. And, he's not doing anything to promote the airport. So I'm thinking, 10 years, you're gonna say, hey, this thing's dead as a doornail. I want to turn it into a housing project.
Yeah.
And I'm 30 feet from his property. I don't want duplexes, out my back door.
Mhm. Yeah.
So at this point, I guess we're limiting it to, or we're proposing to limit it to 2 acres rather than R1, which is 7,500 square foot, which is
What it is now is the 5 acre minimum.
5 acre minimum. So he would have to annex into the city and go to 2 acres. That would be the
How
plan.
much money would that take?
I don't have a dollar figure. I don't know what that would take.
I can tell you the city's fee, but a subdivision application also requires a traffic impact study and a bunch of other analyses that cost money, and you got to hire your planners and
He's got money.
yeah, I'm sure he could put together an application.
So if you lose the airport, you're never getting it back.
Right.
There's no place around here that's gonna get another one.
So what we're proposing in this package is equipping us much better than we would be without it, to prevent or at least strongly discourage, make it a lot harder for someone to come in and redevelop the airport with a subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right. There's no further questions.
Any online, or I guess we wouldn't have any online hands, sorry.
So with that, lots of good, robust public hearing. We will enter back into the planning commission. And that is at 3:44. And so now it is the planning commission's job to discuss, well, actually to come up with a motion, a second, and then we can discuss. It'd be nice to have all the discussion after the motion and the second.
Did you want to say something?
I usually make a slide with like some suggested options for motions that you could say, but I didn't this time, so I was just gonna say out loud. Obviously, we're recommending that you approve this proposal. A motion could be to approve the proposal as presented, which would include the changes that we're suggesting, no longer rezoning those properties around the airport, but instead changing the airport zone rules to allow only one single family home or duplex, the 2 acre minimum lot size. And there was another piece.
Yeah.
Oh, the 200-foot
200
buffer
foot
for
buffer.
residential structures from the runway.
That's
so you-
not currently in A for the agenda item. Is
That-
those changes?
Those changes are,
Or in-
those changes are not shown
it's-
in your packet, but they're shown in the extra updated
Right.
airport code that you have.
But to make a motion, could one assume that those were in the motions, or does someone who makes the motion, do they need to specifically say those things?
Yeah, so if you say, move to approve ordinance 2023-007 as presented by staff, that would include those changes that we presented.
Okay.
My head is spinning on this now that I've got as much information as I've got.
apologize.
So somebody said something to separate the airport from the TSP. And that to me sounds like a good idea. Although it's part of each other, it is 2 entities of themselves to take care of.
Yep, they are, so they are, they're both
Right.
proposed to be part of the same chapter in our comprehensive plan, but we're proposing to separate that chapter into 2 sections. So section 1 would be the TSP, section 2 would be the airport plan.
Well, I think so we can get to the discussion. Mr. Chair, I would like to propose or motion ORD 2023-007 as presented by the staff for approval.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second? Tara, are you still with us?
Yeah, can you say that again?
Sure.
What we're motioning?
So the motion that we're trying to put onto the table so that we can have a discussion about it is the approval of both the TSP adoption and the airport. So that's ORD 2023-007 with the amendments of the 200 feet and 2 acres, et cetera, as presented by the staff.
Okay.
We have a motion. We still need that second.
So if we get a second, we can open it up for discussion.
And then we would have a vote.
I'll second.
All right, so we got a motion, we got a second. Now we can officially
Thank you.
discuss. Once we discuss, then we can vote. I have a feeling we have some guys down here on the end that want to discuss further. So let's go ahead and discuss.
The TSP portion of this is just about almost perfect. You put 2 years into this and done a fine job. The only thing I would have to say is about that much stuff on it, and I'm not gonna do it. The only thing I would flop out of that thing is these roundabouties you want to put on 224 and the old highway. I know, I'm not gonna say that. I would approve, if a motion was made, seconded, I would approve the TSP as written. But this airport seems to have, and I don't want to say it this way, but it has a few flies or flaws not written up that identifies for me enough to say, okay, I'm good with that. Let's go for it. I don't think, well, I don't know how you think, but are you satisfied with the airport?
What, before we get onto that, what are those flaws or discrepancies?
Well, we have an overlay that I found about yesterday. We have a safety zone that really hasn't been scratched on today. And I noticed that in here, it seems to have been amended and maybe even bettered, but we didn't talk about it. And so, the flight line on each end of the airport, as I read it, was 250 feet at the end of the runway at each end. Then it goes out 1,000 feet forward and it's 700 feet at that 1,000-foot. What do I want to call it? X mark, whether it's canyon or whatever, with a no build zone under it. Does everybody understand that portion of it? You can't build under the approach and takeoff and landing portion of that. We don't even have a picture of that up there other than I remember what we did in 90 something, 94, 95, 96, 97. Beverly and Bob, they crammed it down our noses, so one of us or two of us or three of us, we should ought to remember it. I thought we had this dealt with a long time ago. So I also thought that this airport was in perpetuity, always going to be there for an emergency landing area, which it has provided. And thank you for putting lights in. And I don't see enough.
Would you not agree, though, that these codes that we're trying to implement into that would do just that, though, in preserving the runway, its airport, and as said, the delineage of what's able by code now to codify what can use the runway in a way to protect that? If you can't build on either side of the runways, that protects the runway.
Yeah, the overlay from the county, is it the county or the state? It has the height restriction, right, of 35 feet, so many feet
Yeah.
side to side.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem with the airport is the confusion of what is being said. They don't understand and they live there. I go up, I'm looking, okay, I don't know anything about airports. Okay, we going by this, okay. I promised myself I would not bring up what happened a few years ago with this thing. It's done. Let's figure it out. I agree with Richard. I would have passed this thing real fast. Separately. And I'm not saying I wouldn't pass the airport. It's just I have a problem, and I think they've got the same problem I do. What's really is in the thing? I got this today. Is all this the same as what I had?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. But you guys have done a fantastic job, but I don't understand why we're putting them both together. And you probably could explain to me again. I probably wouldn't understand, but I wish you would do it again.
You mean to explain it with
To
pictures?
explain, but no, to explain why these two has to be together.
Because they're both in the same zoning code chapter. Is that right?
They're both updating.
See, we always separate everything else in this meetings, right? We never go, well, we got this. What? Addition to the city, we got this one. Let's put them together. We haven't done that. We separated it.
We have done that, and it's very common for cities or counties to bundle ordinances together or bundle proposals together under the same ordinance. Sometime, certainly when they're related, and you can see how transportation and airport things are at least tangentially related, if not directly. But also sometimes completely unrelated. The county has a sort of regular code update program where they go through their running list of code issues, and they'll bundle multiple code updates that are totally unrelated under the same ordinance. And part of the reason to do that is because there's a lot of noticing and staff time and admin work involved with bringing one ordinance through hearings. And so if we can bundle those together, it saves the city time and money.
So if we approve this, it goes to the city council. We are not gonna have.
Whether you issue a recommendation to approve or whatever recommendation you issue goes to the
So
city
we are
council.
not gonna have another meeting where we can get more of us.
You're not scheduled for another meeting on this.
See, that's where. Go ahead.
It seems to me, just for public comment, that really the intent of the city is twofold. One, to make sure that there's language supported around airport code that protects the liability of the city from different uses and how the airport is used inside the urban city growth boundary. And so this is more of a liability and legalistic check to ensure that there is some type of language, most importantly, that protects the integrity of the airport and how the airport is currently being used. As I read this code, I see this code as language that is really favored towards supporting, protecting the long-term longevity of the airport, which we all have come to love and value. And so I don't know who the owner is, and it sounds like there is a real fear of that person and what they choose to do with it, which is completely out of the city's control. But the one thing that the city can do is try to incentivize what the airport continues to look like in its pristine level. And this is our attempt to protect that airport through code. It is less incentivizing to sell that when you could make, 500 houses out of that 60 acres. We're saying you can't do that. You can only have 2 acres. And so just by that movement alone is the city's attempt to try to preserve the thing that we love so much. And this is the only ability that we have to do that is through this code. So our failure to move that forward would in fact could potentially incentivize the owner of that airport to move hastily in an effort to do something that is not within the intent of the city or the people, because right now there is nothing that codifies his ability to do whatever he wants with it. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, you articulated that very well. Correct.
I think that's a fabulous point.
Good job.
So, do you have any comments, questions?
So far as the TSP goes, I'm completely in support and I agree with everything this gentleman said here. We're thinking of a way to protect the property as much as we can. And yeah, I think that's in all the homeowners' interests.
Yes.
And it should be, and the city.
And the city.
And the city as well, you're right. And those things are got to be in clear view and in front of us, not beautiful, but it's an evolution, you start somewhere, you finally get to where you want to be. And I think this is probably that, we're starting somewhere and this is where we're starting.
I have a question. So if they see something going on, can the city stop this action?
What do you mean by something going on?
Well, we already, I don't know how, I'm wording it wrong, don't laugh at me.
I'm not, I'm laughing with you.
Yeah.
As far as development goes?
Yeah.
Really, the city has no teeth until it's
I
a
know,
city property.
that's why we're saying this.
So at this point, we're protecting the future if it becomes a city.
Okay, so if we say yes to this, when is this going to go into place? In 3 years?
No, we're adopting it now. The city council is going to adopt it hopefully in a couple of weeks. And then if the day after the city council adopts it, they choose to annex into the city, then it's already in effect. Right now, if he chooses to do this and we don't do anything, he could conceivably, is it adopted under R1? Because that's what our comp plan says.
It would be another difficult process because we don't have any, I don't know what we would do.
That's the problem.
Yeah. And that's how this whole thing came to be, was because we're starting to develop properties. I say we, the city, people within the city limits are developing properties that abut the airport, and the Oregon Air people, what's their official FAA?
Yeah.
They're noticed when there's properties developed nearby, and they said, hey, red flag, you guys don't have anything. And so this is just our plan and our teeth, that if it ever does get developed, this is what it's going to come in as. And then there's going to be a robust discussion at that point in time, because it'll come before us again at a subdivision application and all that stuff, annexation.
So this really is a protection issue of the airport for their flyaway and for their safety zones and the surrounding however many feet, yards, acres to what they currently have and should always have. So I don't want to step on a whole bunch of toes for doing something without knowing what I'm doing.
Yes, is the short
I feel
answer.
better with what our commissioner here said, and I hate making mistakes, but you've had a lot of experts on this, and like I said, there's only a couple of,
So the motion's still up, right?
Correct.
Okay, I call for the vote.
Could I ask one more legalistic question? That I just.
Oh, you did good.
I'm unfamiliar with the relationship between a CCNR and coding. And if the CCNR is already historically in place and it's a 5 acre limit, what occurs when coding changes and how does that, what trumps what in something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the 5 acre reference was the county's zoning, and I think the CCNRs require a 2 acre minimum.
Okay.
That's what we heard from some of the folks we talked to, and that's where we got that 2 acre number. We just thought if this requirement is already in place, we'll just match whatever that
Excellent.
requirement is. We didn't pull that number out of a hat.
No, that's great. That just, so it doesn't, our move doesn't put us in any type of legal binds because of something that's, and that's. thank you.
Correct, yeah, and I'll just note that in most cases, the city's requirements are more lax than your HOA or the CCNRs will be, and the CCNRs can require
More than-
can
yeah.
impose higher requirements. So the city could allow a 7,500 square foot lot, and if those CCNRs still existed, they could still impose the 2 acre minimum, even though the city allows something more dense.
Great.
At which point, what's the point of zoning it R1 with the
Right.
75, right?
Okay,
I called for the vote.
he's called for a vote. Any further discussion before we call for the vote?
I called for the vote.
Stop rushing things. Tara, do you have any last comments or concerns?
Nope, I'm
Okay.
good. I'm good with it.
All right, let's call for a vote then. All those in favor of motion as presented, please raise your right hand. Right hand.
I'm raising my hand.
Motion passes.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Okay,
Good job, Betty. Thank you.
so this goes on to the city council. Date,
This Monday, December 11th at 6:00 PM, 6:30 PM. Thank you. And the planning division is enthusiastically requesting any and all public input related to this issue and these amendments anytime. So anytime City Hall is open, come visit us in the Community Development Office. You can email us at planning@cityofestacada.org. And you can call us at 503-630-8286. We want to hear from you, especially if there's any issues related to the airport that we have just that we may not have heard of. We know there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of kind of fears about what might happen there. We would love to consider and address them if possible with this package. So get a hold of us. Thank you.
okay, we have a few more items of business here. Titled Commission Business. Is there any? There's nothing noted on there.
Oh, if there's nothing, then there's nothing.
Okay, no more public comment. Next meeting dates, we have a laundry list of them, so November 29th. And then I believe one was emailed to us the other day, was it 13th?
Before you hang it up, I want to talk.
Hang on, we'll get you there in just a second. So let's talk about meeting dates.
Yes.
29th.
So Wednesday, November 29th at 2:00 PM. Do any of you know right now that you can confirm or can confirm that you can or cannot attend that meeting? That meeting, the one agenda item currently on that date is the downtown design code amendments relating to design review process requirements, noticing requirements.
Is there any way that that can be pushed to combine that meeting to the 13th? Seeing that it's only 2 weeks later.
It probably could. We would not have to redo the public noticing.
When is that going to council?
What day you like seeing?
So it's currently scheduled to go to Planning Commission on November 29th, and then it would go to council on December 11th. But if it goes to Planning Commission on December 13th, then it will go to council in January.
What is the agenda on the 13th?
And on the 13th, we have, I think, 2 land use applications, and we're expecting a 3rd. So it would be pretty
Whatever you want to do.
busy.
How are you guys' schedules looking?
So what was the first date?
Sorry, November
29th.
29th, Wednesday.
I'm in the wrong month, that's why. I think that's already marked on mine, then.
You say that's a long meeting?
Nope, but not.
I don't think, like, our part of it will not be long. We never know how many questions there will be or how much testimony. But,
We don't either.
yeah, I don't think we've received any testimony about that yet.
No, not as yet.
So. That would be quite a lot.
Okay, let's stick to the 29th meeting. Is there any way we could pull those other ones ahead? Probably not at this point, huh?
I don't, no, we can't do that with noticing requirements.
Okay.
So the December meeting, this is a question also, is your normal meeting date would be December 20th. And we assumed that people would prefer to push that farther in advance of the holidays. But we can be open question to the planning commission. We could also look at a Thursday if those days don't work.
How does the 13th work?
December 13th.
All right.
13?
Tara, are you in on this conversation? We're gonna stick with the November 29th meeting at 2 and then looking at December 13th. Is that something you're available for?
The 29th is most likely I can. December 13th, yes.
Okay. All right, so let's stick to both those dates then.
Okay, I got a memo from the city hall saying that we had a meeting on December 13th.
Yep, it's already there.
Yep,
Yep.
okay, great.
So that's still there.
We're just making sure that we're gonna have a
We
quorum.
got two at the same time.
Okay,
Uh,
so those dates stick. The 20th is not on the table.
Correct. No meeting on December 20th.
Perfect.
Taylor,
And then
on-
looking forward to January, I know that's a long ways out, but we would be back on track to be the third week, so like the 17th.
Yep.
Okay. If we need it.
Taylor, on the 29th meeting, could you just provide a quick update on where we're at with our coding of parks inside of subdivisions?
Sure. Yep.
Thank you. I just want to keep moving that.
Yeah.
Preferably before we approve any other housing developments in December.
Okay.
Yes.
The changes to this, whatever that looks like. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're good there. And then we gotta go back to Commissioner Sager.
All I want to say is, you guys did a great job. I was confused. You did a great job. You
14.
saved the day. I didn't. He was sitting over here.
Ryan, you really
talking to
did.
me and telling me what I wasn't hearing. You know, so that's why I told him to shut up, because he did fantastic. So
We're a team.
so
Thank you.
now we know where we pick these guys. Thank you very much for everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks.
Any last words? I think that's the last thing on the agenda. And welcome. Oh,
Yeah,
your first meeting.
great first meeting.
I tell you what, guys, there's more attendance here than we've had in probably 2 years
Yeah.
combined.
This is it here.
All right. Meeting adjourned at 4:10.